Welcome to today's video, friends. You're about to hear a breathtaking and emotional story that will touch your heart and leave you speechless. A millionaire followed his housekeeper after work, and what he discovered changed both of their lives forever. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, leave a comment, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss more powerful and emotional stories. Also, tell us in the comments, which country are you watching this video from? We'd love to know, and remember, watch until the very end, because you won't believe how this unforgettable story unfolds. So let's get started. Michael Reynolds stood on the balcony of his mansion's second-floor office, a hot cup of coffee in hand, when he saw her appear at the gate right on time. It was exactly 7:15 a.m., not a minute earlier, not a minute later. For 2 years, Alina Carter had worked in his house, and never once had she been late. To most employers, such precision would be cause for satisfaction, but for Michael, it bred suspicion. He was a man who had built an empire in real estate, who had dealt with people from every walk of life. And he knew when someone was hiding something. From above, he watched Alina cross the garden with her usual brisk steps, clutching a black tote bag close to her chest, her eyes fixed on the ground. She wore the same outfit every day: dark jeans, a plain cotton blouse, and worn white sneakers that had clearly seen better days. What drew his attention, however, wasn't the clothes, but the way she carried herself. Her posture was straight, almost defiant, as if she bore an invisible rod inside her spine. But in her movements was the quiet heaviness of someone fighting a silent war. Michael, 45 years old, used to seeing people either broken by life or merely enduring a rough patch, couldn't place Alina in either category. He descended the staircase and entered the kitchen. By then, Alina was already preparing breakfast. She greeted him politely with the same neutral, "Good morning, Mr. Reynolds," stripped of warmth. He responded in kind, pretending to flip through the morning paper while stealing glances at her. Her work was unnervingly flawless. Every movement precise, every task completed to perfection. In 2 years, he couldn't recall a single mistake. It was as though she had poured her entire being into being perfect, a shield of duty that never cracked. "Alina," he said as he sat down, "join me for coffee. This table is too big for one." As always, she froze for half a second before replying with a firm, "Thank you, Mr. Reynolds, but I need to finish cleaning the living room by 9. The same answer. The same invisible wall. Michael wasn't a man who gave up easily, but her polite refusals left him no room to insist. The rest of the morning unfolded like every other. Alina moving through the house with her quiet grace. Michael trying to work but inevitably tracking her with his eyes whenever she crossed the garden. There was something about her, a story too heavy for her thin shoulders, something she never allowed to surface. Around 11, as Michael was on the phone arguing with a contractor, he heard a thud in the living room. He excused himself and went to check. Alina was on her knees, gathering fallen books. Nothing serious, but her movements were slow, labored, as if every motion cost her effort. "Are you okay?" he asked. "Yes, Mr. Reynolds. Just tripped a little," she replied with a weaker than usual voice. Rising, she braced herself against the table, as though searching for support before standing upright. The detail was small, nearly invisible. But Michael caught it, and it planted the first seed of alarm. At lunch, he noticed she barely touched her plate. A few grains of rice, a small piece of chicken, then nothing but pushing food around. When he offered to have the rest packed up, she refused quickly. "I have food at home." "Thank you." Another courteous lie. Michael began to realize she was building lies like bricks in a wall, shielding herself from a world that wanted to pry too closely. But that afternoon, he saw something that shattered the illusion. From the study doorway, unnoticed, he watched her in the kitchen. Alina opened her black tote bag, pulled out a small vial of pills, swallowed 2, and tucked it away swiftly. Michael recognized the pharmacy label, an expensive boutique pharmacy that sold imported medication for specialized treatments. It wasn't just exhaustion. Something deeper was wrong. "Elena, are you feeling well?" he asked minutes later. Feigning casual concern, "I could call a doctor." "No need, Mr. Reynolds," she replied calmly. "Just a little headache." A headache that required costly medication? Michael didn't buy it. But he knew pressing her now would only drive her deeper into silence. So he decided to wait, to watch more closely. That evening, at exactly 5 o'clock, Elena put away her supplies, collected her bag, and stepped into his study as always. "I'm finished for today, Mr. Reynolds. See you tomorrow." "Elena, wait a moment," he said, rising. Her shoulders stiffened. "Did I do something wrong?" "On the contrary," Michael replied. "You've worked here for 2 years, and we've never discussed your salary. I want to offer you a raise. A significant one. 50% more, plus a proper contract. And health insurance." For the first time, Elena faltered. Her eyes widened in shock. Instead of relief or gratitude, fear flashed across her face. "No, Mr. Reynolds," she said firmly. "I can't accept that. My job is already well paid." "Please don't insist." It was an absurd answer. Michael knew it. Anyone in their right mind would welcome such an offer. Yet Elena refused with a finality that unsettled him. She almost fled the room, leaving him staring after her, convinced now more than ever that something was terribly wrong, and that he would find out what it was. The next day, Michael was already on the porch before dawn, pretending to check emails while waiting for Elena to arrive. At 7:15 m sharp, she slipped through the gate, the black tote hugged to her side. If you didn't know what to look for, you'd miss it. The fractional hesitation on the steps, the measured economy in her breathing, the way she rationed strength as if it were currency. Over breakfast, he tried to bridge the distance an inch at a time. "Elena, do you live far?" "From here?" "Yes, pretty far. Do you have family?" She hesitated, then offered the first personal fact he had ever extracted in 2 years. "I have a daughter." "How old?" 8. He heard the crack in her voice, soft as a hairline fracture in glass. She gathered dishes and retreated to the kitchen before he could say the wrong thing. The morning advanced in quiet routines until just after 2. Elena was vacuuming the living room when she stopped abruptly, braced her back against the wall, and shut her eyes. Michael, watching from the hallway, mistook it for a pause until her knees trembled. She tried for one more step, and her body simply let go. The vacuum hit the floor with a dull thud. Elena crumpled beside it, motionless. "Elena!" He sprinted, checked her pulse racing, her skin paper pale. He lifted her carefully onto the sofa and reached for his phone. No. Her eyes fluttered open, cloudy, disoriented. "Please don't call a doctor." "You lost consciousness," he said, keeping his voice steady. "You need to be examined." I said no, please. The plea held terror, not stubbornness. He brought water with sugar and waited while the color crept back into her face. The tremor in her fingers didn't leave. "When did you last eat a full meal?" "I'm fine," she lied, eyes dropping. "When did you last sleep through the night?" Silence thick, unforgiving. "Elena," he said quietly, "why are you punishing your body like this? What are you afraid of?" Something in her gave way. Not the dignified, tightly held composure he knew, but a deep, shuddering break. Tears came hard, helpless, like a dam finally surrendering. For the first time, she didn't pull away when he sat beside her. "I need this job," she whispered, voice splintered. "I can't lose it." "You won't," he promised. "But tell me what's happening." "I can't," she said, shaking her head. "I can't talk about it." He understood a line had been reached. Pushing now would only drive her deeper into the cave where she hid her pain. He helped her to her feet, watched her steady herself, and told her to go home rest. Please, just this once." She nodded, collected her tote, and slipped out the door like a shadow. 15 minutes later, Michael's car eased into traffic a discreet distance behind a city bus. Guilt pricked him. He was tailing an employee. But a heavier weight pressed. Harder. Fear. Something was devouring her life from the inside, and if he didn't look, he would never forgive himself. He tracked her to Southridge, a working-class neighborhood that had never been on his real estate maps. Elena left the bus, cut through a pharmacy-lined block, and entered a white brick building Michael knew from charity galas and tax paperwork. St. Grace Medical Center. A fist closed in his chest. Was she sick? Or someone she loved? He followed her through the crowded lobby, stayed back as she stepped into an elevator, and pressed 4. His mind raced. 4th floor. He'd funded equipment there. Pediatric oncology. By the time he reached the hallway, the smell of antiseptic had already surrendered to something heavier, the dense, suspended grief of families who had learned to breathe around fear. On the benches, fathers looked at their hands like they contained answers. Mothers clutched tote bags stuffed with paperwork and snacks they hoped their kids would keep down. Then he found her. Elena sat on a blue plastic chair outside a half-open door, that black tote at her feet. Her face had changed, softened, warmed, transformed by a tenderness Michael had never seen. From inside the room, a small voice drifted out. "Mom did. You bring the book?" Elena stood and slipped into the doorway. Michael stepped close enough to see through the narrow gap. A little girl lay propped on pillows, bald head beneath a knit cap, skin pale as paper. Monitors blinked a steady constellation at her bedside. But her eyes, bright, fierce, unflinching, met her mother's with a courage far too large for 8 years. "Are you tired, Mom?" the girl asked, reading what Elena tried to hide. "I'm okay, honey," Elena lied gently. "It's the money." "Again, isn't it?" Elena's lids fell shut. "Don't worry about that, Sophie. Mommy's going to take care of everything." "Sophie." Michael stepped back, swallowing the raw heat behind his eyes, and approached the nurse's station. A woman in her 50s with kind eyes looked up. "Excuse me," he said, voice low. "I'm trying to understand a patient's situation. Her name is Sophia Carter. He paused. The truth was a boundary and a bridge. "I'm her mother's employer. I want to help." The nurse's expression sharpened with caution. "Are you family?" "No," he forced the word out. "But I might be the only person who can remove the obstacle that's killing them." Something in his tone, pleading without pride, softened her stance. She glanced left and right, then leaned closer. "Sophia has acute lymphoblastic leukemia," she said lightly, carefully. It responds well if treated early. She came to us late." "What are her chances?" He braced himself. "With standard protocols, around 80%. With the most advanced regimen, newer targeted meds, more precise diagnostics, better supportive care, closer to 95. But those aren't covered." "How much? For the full 18-month course?" "About $180,000. Roughly $10,000 a month, some months more with imaging and hospital days." For Michael, numbers were usually an abstract game, but these were not numbers. They were days of a child's life. He could spend that on a weekend renovation. She could never earn it if she worked to the edge of death and beyond. And if she doesn't get those meds? He asked, already knowing the answer. The nurse didn't speak. Her eyes did. He thanked her and returned to the doorway just as Elena began to read. Her voice lifted, soft and melodic, turning hospital air into a small, safe room. Sophie laughed. At a silly character voice, and for a fleeting second, she was only a child, unstitched from tubes and lab results. Michael retreated to the window at the end of the hall, where city light ran in tired stripes across the floor. He rested his forehead against the cool glass. He could fix the money problem with a signature. He could buy the time they needed. But he also understood something else now. Elena's wall wasn't pride alone. It was the last piece of dignity she could control. If he bulldozed it with cash, he might save a life and break the spirit tethered to it, so he wouldn't bulldoze. He would build a bridge one she could cross on her own feet. He waited until visiting hours loosened, then made his way back toward the room. Elena sat by Sophie, turning pages with hands that trembled only between paragraphs. When the story ended, she kissed her daughter's forehead and promised to return early tomorrow. Sophie, brave and bright, nodded solemnly. In the elevator down, Elena didn't head to the main floor. She pressed B. Michael followed on the next car. The basement was colder, dimmer, a warren of laundry carts and storage cages. In a shadowed corner, a makeshift nest, thin mattresses, battered blankets, a line of mothers' faces smoothed by exhaustion. Elena spread a worn throw on a mattress, set down a plastic bag with spare clothes and a pack of crackers, and pulled out a small notebook. From the darkness, Michael watched her write columns of figures. Tomorrow's bill. What remained? What she could earn in overtime no one had offered. She opened her tote and lifted a small velvet pouch. A thin gold bracelet and a simple ring winked against her palm. Heirlooms, he guessed, held like a memory she wasn't ready to sell and might have to. She closed her fingers around them, breathed, and tucked them away. That was the moment he chose his path. He would not arrive with an envelope and strip her of the one thing she had left, her agency. He would go to her, name the truth, own his failures, and offer help on terms that preserved what mattered to her most. Outside, the evening had gone indigo. Michael sat in his car and stared at his hands on the wheel. 2 years Elena had walked through his immaculate home carrying a storm he never asked about. 2 years he'd admired her precision and missed her pain. Tomorrow he would stop missing it. Tomorrow he would stop being a bystander in a story happening under his roof. He waited until after lunch, when the house was quiet and there was nowhere for her to rush. He found Elena in the library, dusting the shelves, the vacuum coiled neatly at her feet, the afternoon light laying soft amber across the rug. Michael stepped in, closed the door gently behind him, and spoke before she could read his expression as reprimand. "Elena, I need to talk to you. Please sit." She stiffened instantly, like a wire pulled taut. "Did I do something wrong, Mr. Reynolds?" "No," he said. "If anyone did something wrong, it was me." She perched on the edge of the sofa as if bracing for impact. He took the chair opposite, hands clasped to keep them steady. "Yesterday, after you fainted, I got scared. When you left, I followed you." The color drained from her face. Her fingers tightened on the cushion seam. "You followed me?" "To Grace," he said quietly. "I saw Sophie." Her name from his mouth landed between them with the weight of a secret finally spoken. "I'm sorry I invaded your privacy. I should have asked. But I couldn't keep pretending I didn't. See what was happening." Elena's composure cracked like thin ice. A small, raw sound escaped her, half breath, half plea. "I can explain." "You don't have to," he said. "I should have asked you 2 years ago if you were okay." She shook her head once, twice, and then the dam broke. Not the restrained tears he'd witnessed before, but a sob that seemed to pull pain up from the solace of her feet. Michael stood, fetched a glass of water, pressed it into her hands, and waited. When the storm eased to tremors, he spoke carefully. "You will never lose your job. Not for being honest, not for needing time, not for needing help." Her lashes, wet and clumped, lifted to meet his eyes. "But I lied to you, every day. You protected your family," he said. "That's not a lie, that's love." He drew a breath. "Tell me everything, from the beginning. When did Sophie start getting sick?" Elena stared at the water as though answers lived there. She started haltingly, then the story found its rhythm, the small fevers that wouldn't quit, the bruises that appeared like shadows, the weight slipping away. The day a doctor said acute lymphoblastic leukemia, and a life split neatly into before and after, no insurance. Savings gone in months. A job at a boutique that paid too little. The math that never worked. The first admission at St. Grace, the second. The day she took the housekeeping position in Michael's home, because it paid more than anything else she could find, and because if she moved through a day with precision, she could almost believe the rest of her life wasn't falling apart. I thought if I did everything perfectly, she whispered, nothing else would break. Silence held them for a long beat. Michael felt something twist inside his chest, not pity, but recognition. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Elena, I can pay for Sophie's treatment. Her answer snapped out, instant and steel. No, why not? Because she's my daughter, my responsibility. I won't live on someone else's charity. He let the refusal settle, then asked, softer, and if you can't find the money, what then? She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The horror lived plain in her eyes. Elena, he said, choosing each word, I'm not offering pity. I'm offering help because I can. Because it would barely register in my accounts, and it would change your daughter's life. It's not about the money, she said, standing suddenly as if motion could keep her dignity from slipping. It's about who I am when this is over. I have to be the mother who kept her child alive, not the woman who let a stranger fix it. Michael stood slowly. What if I'm not a stranger? She blinked, thrown by the gentleness in his voice. He swallowed and let the oldest wound he owned rise to the surface. I had a son, he said. His name was Henry. He died when he was 6. Same diagnosis. The room shifted, air thicker. Time slower. Elena lowered herself back onto the sofa, as if her knees had forgotten their purpose. I had money, Michael continued, voice roughening. All the money. We flew to every specialist who'd take us. We bought every drug they suggested. We did everything right, and I still lost him. He paused, gathering the frayed edge of his breath. Do you know what's been killing me ever since? The thought that my son died with every advantage, and another child might die without the most basic chance. I can't go back and save Henry, but I can help save Sophie. And if you refuse that because of pride, it's not pride, she shot back, tears flaring again. It's the only piece of myself I can still hold. He nodded once, acknowledging the truth of it. Then he asked very quietly, if it were my child, if I were broke and you could help, would you let him die so I could keep my pride? Elena's mouth opened and closed. The fight in her eyes battled the love in her bones. At last her shoulders sagged, and she pressed trembling fingers to her lips. I don't know how to accept this, she whispered. How do I live owing you my daughter's life? You won't owe me, he said. We'll make this yours, on your terms. What terms? First, Michael said, nothing changes about your job except what makes your life easier. Same responsibilities, flexible hours, paid leave whenever Sophie needs you. I'll formalize a raise and full health coverage clean, on paper. Second, I pay the hospital directly. No envelopes, no awkwardness. Third, no one needs to know. Not the staff, not the neighbors. Not even Sophie, if that's what you want. It is, she said at once. She should believe her mother took care of her. I don't want her to grow up thinking we survived because of charity. Then she won't, he said. She'll grow up knowing her mother worked like a warrior and that her employer valued her enough to pay what she's worth. Elena let out a long, shaking breath. A faint, disbelieving smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. You're manipulating me. Yes, he said, not pretending otherwise. Because your daughter's life is more important than either of our egos. She stared at her hands. The room listened to the small sounds of the house, the vacuum, a distant bird, the soft tick of the clock. Finally, she lifted her gaze. If I say yes, I need conditions of my own. Name them. I keep working. No special treatment that makes me feel like a guest in a life I didn't earn. Done. When Sophie is healthy, I will find a way to pay you back. Maybe not in money, but in work, in time, in something that matters. I'll accept repayment in daisies, he said softly. She frowned in confusion. For Sophie's garden, he explained. Plant me 100 of them when she's well. We'll call it even. Her laugh came out like a sob softened by sunlight. And no one knows, not even the nurses. If they ask, I got a better job with a better salary. That's the story. That's the story, he agreed. I'll revise your contract today, a legitimate raise. And I'll call St. Grace's billing office to arrange direct payment under an anonymous donor program. Anonymous? It's not about my name, he said. It's about Sophie's. Next birthday. She covered her face with both hands, then let them fall. There was a new light in her eyes, fragile but real. Hope, returning to a home it had fled. Elena stood, and for the first time since she'd crossed his threshold 2 years ago, stepped into his space and embraced him. It wasn't romantic. It was gratitude, relief, terror, faith all braided into a single human touch. Thank you, she said into his shoulder. For seeing me. Thank you, he answered, surprising himself with the truth of it, for letting me. When she pulled back, she swiped at her cheeks and tried on a tentative smile that made her look years younger. There's one more thing. Anything. Sophie will want to meet you, she said. Properly, not as a man who followed us, but as my boss, my friend. I'd be honored, he said. And for the first time in a decade, the word felt like purpose instead of performance. That night, Michael drafted a new employment agreement, salary increase, comprehensive benefits, an explicit clause granting unlimited paid leave for pediatric medical care. He called the hospital's philanthropy liaison, arranged an immediate payment to zero out the balance, and set up a monthly transfer tagged to an anonymous fund. Then he sat alone in his quiet kitchen, hands flat on the table, and realized his house no longer felt like a museum. It felt like a place someone might come home to. The next afternoon, he and Elena drove to St. Grace together. On the way, she told him about Sophie's love of drawing and how she was braver than any adult. In that ward, Michael listened, memorizing details, the silly voices that made Sophie giggle, the nurse who braided caps to match holidays, the tiny victories that ordinary people called days. He gripped the wheel, not in fear this time, but in resolve. Wasn't arriving at a hospital as a man running from ghosts. He was arriving as someone finally willing to stand between a child and the dark, with his heart open and his checkbook too, and with a promise to protect a mother's dignity as fiercely as he would protect her daughter's life. They drove to St. Grace the next day under a pale blue sky, the kind that looked scrubbed clean after an evening rain. Elena sat in the passenger seat, palms pressed against her black tote, knuckles white. Michael kept his eyes on the road, but his voice stayed close to her. She'll like me if I'm honest, right? She will, Elena said. Sophie can smell pretend from a mile away. Just be yourself, and no sad faces. I'll do my best. On the 4th floor, the pediatric oncology wing hummed with quiet courage, soft rubber soles, machine beeps, the whisper of parents translating medical words into hope. Michael stopped at the doorway and let Elena enter first. Sophie, Elena said, her voice warm as sunlight. I brought someone to meet you. The little girl looked up from the sketchbook. A knit cap framed her face. Freckles dusted her nose. Like a constellation. The 4-pole beside her bed held clear bags that fed healing and exhaustion in equal measure. But her eyes, those eyes were alive. Hi, she said, small but direct. I'm Sophie Carter. Michael stepped in with a careful smile. Hi Sophie, I'm Michael. I work with your mom. She says you're nice, Sophie said. She doesn't say that about a lot of people. Elena shot her a look. Sophie grinned. Michael laughed, the tension leaving his shoulders by degrees. "Your mom is the best person I've ever hired," he said. "Maybe the best person I've ever met." Sophie angled her head. "You look like someone who thinks too much." "That's true," Michael admitted. "But I'm trying to think less and do more." "Doing more is good," she declared, then patted the bed. "Do you want to see my drawings?" He approached, stopping to ask, "May I?" Sophie said, flipping the sketchbook. There were houses with pitched roofs and fat chimneys, a garden overflowing with flowers that looked like bursts of sunshine, and little stick figures holding hands. "This one," she said, pointing, "is our house when I get out. Mom says there'll be a garden with daisies because daisies are simple and honest." Michael met Elena's eyes. They both felt the tug of that word honest. "I love daisies," he said. "I was hoping you might plant some for me too." "Deal," Sophie said solemnly, small palm extended. He shook it like an oath. A knock sounded. A woman in her 50s, gray-streaked ponytail and kind, clinical eyes, stepped in with a tablet. "Elena," she said, then noticed Michael. "And you must be Mr. Reynolds. I'm Dr. Lauren Chun, Sophie's oncologist." They moved to the small table by the window while Sophie went back to coloring a page the child life specialist had left behind. Dr. Chun lowered her voice without slipping into secrecy. "Sophie is responding to the standard protocol," she began. "But there are advanced options we believe could improve both her chances and her quality of life. Targeted agents, more precise imaging, closer supportive care. We'd also like to track MR de minimal residual disease more frequently. It's the difference between treating a diagnosis and tailoring treatment to a child." "What does improve mean in numbers?" Michael asked. "With the enhanced regimen, her projected remission odds move from around 80% to the mid-90s, Dr. Chun said. "And we can likely reduce some of the harsher side effects." Michael didn't breathe until the numbers finished lining up. "What do you need from us?" "Consistency," Dr. Chun replied. "The therapies are expensive, and insurance will fight us. We need a guarantee that cost won't interrupt her schedule." "It won't," Michael said. "I'll arrange direct payment through your philanthropy office. Anonymous donor program." Elena shifted, torn between relief and the last scraps of the wall she'd built. Dr. Chun looked from one to the other and kept her face neutral. "Kind. We can also move Sophie to a private room," the doctor added, "and assign a nurse who knows her case intimately. It eases stress, and that matters." "Please," Elena said softly, "if that's okay." "It's okay," Michael said. "Do it," Dr. Chun nodded. "I'll call billing and care coordination now." She stood, then paused. "And for what it's worth, Mr. Reynolds, doing more is always the right instinct here." When she left, Michael and Elena returned to Sophie's bedside. The little girl had drawn 3 stick figures in the garden, now 2 tall, 1 small under. A crooked sun. She held up a crayon. "Can I add you to the picture?" she asked Michael, matter of fact. "If your mom says it's okay," he said, looking to Elena. Elena's answer came in the shape of a nod she tried not to make too fast. "It's okay." Sophie added another taller figure and drew a little daisy between them all. "Now we're not alone," she said simply. Michael felt something turn over in his chest, like a locked door opening on well-oiled hinges. "Sophie, can I tell you a secret?" She leaned in, conspiratorial. "I'm excellent at secrets. I used to feel very alone," he said. "But meeting you and your mom has made me feel like I belong somewhere again." Sophie considered. "This is only an 8-year-old philosopher can." "Then you should come back a lot," she said. "That's how belonging works." "Deal," he said, shaking on it again. They spent the afternoon making the hospital smaller. Michael fetched a rolling tray of art supplies. Elena read 2 chapters aloud in the voices Sophie liked: Silly Villain, Squeaky Mouse. A nurse came to adjust the drip. Sophie squeezed Elena's fingers, then reached for Michael's without looking, as if she already knew his hand would be there. He closed his around hers and kept his face steady, not sad. When Sophie dozed, Elena walked with him to the corridor windows. Cars streamed below, ordinary and oblivious. "She likes you," Elena said, a softness in her voice he'd never heard. "I like her more," Michael answered. "And I meant what I said to Dr. Chun. The money won't stop." Elena nodded, but her eyes held 100 other fears, the ones money couldn't fix. He didn't pretend he could erase those. "I updated your contract," he added gently. "The raise is official. Full health coverage. Unlimited paid leave for Sophie's care. HR sent it to your email. If anyone asks at the hospital, the story is simple. Your job pays what you deserve." The gratitude on her face wasn't bright. It was anchored. "Thank you for keeping it mine." That evening, as twilight pressed purple into the city's seams, they returned to Sophie's room with a small box from the hospital gift shop. Inside was a packet of daisy seeds. Michael set it on the bedside table. "For the garden when you get home," he told Sophie when she stirred. "I'm going to plant them in a perfect row," she murmured, not fully awake. "Perfect rows make me feel safe. Then we'll make rows so perfect even the bees salute," he said. Sophie smiled in her sleep. Elena adjusted the sheet and stood very still, as if memorizing peace. On their way out, they stopped by the nurse's station to handle details. Michael filled out forms for the donor account. Elena confirmed next week's schedule. A volunteer with a cart of paperbacks offered a free novel. Michael took one at random and read the first line under the fluorescent light, savoring how ordinary it felt to borrow a story in a place that was rewriting theirs. In the parking garage, the concrete held the day's heat like a slow exhale. Before he unlocked the car, Elena touched his sleeve. "You told Sophie a secret," she said. "I want to tell you one." He turned. The air between them felt balanced on a hinge. "I haven't slept at home in weeks," she said. "I sleep in the basement so I can be near her. I thought if I left, the world would change when I wasn't watching." "You don't have to sleep down there anymore," he said. "We'll move a cot into her private room. I'll pay for a parent's sleeper chair. And if you need to go home, go home. Nothing will change because you blink." Elena breathed out, and the breath sounded like surrender to a truth she could trust. "Tomorrow," she said, "you'll meet Sophie when she's not trying to be brave. She asks you hard questions." "I'll answer them," Michael said, honestly. The next morning, he arrived with breakfast sandwiches, fruit cups, and 3 tiny cartons of chocolate milk, one for Sophie, one for Elena, and one for the nervous, overthinking man who was learning to show up. Sophie tore into hers with ceremonial seriousness, leaving a chocolatey mustache. "You're funny," she declared after watching him attempt the tiny straw. "But you're also sad sometimes." "I am," he said, and he didn't look away. "I had a little boy once. His name was Henry. He got sick like you. Did he get better?" Sophie asked, direct as a doctor. "No," Michael said. "He didn't." Sophie's small hand covered his for a beat. "I'll get better," she said. "And then you can remember him without the hurt part." Elena pressed her lips together, eyes glassy. Michael nodded, not trusting his voice. "I'd like that." Asterisk later, Dr. Chun returned with a care coordinator and a flurry of logistics. Insurance fights they would preempt, infusion dates, lab draws, a counseling appointment for Elena, a child life art session for Sophie. Paper bloomed across the bedside. Table like snow. Elena initialed where told, signed where needed. When it was over, Dr. Chun tapped the folder. "This," she said, "is a plan." Michael looked at Elena and saw it land plan, not wish. A bridge, not a cliff. That afternoon, while Elena read and Sophie colored, Michael stepped out to place. One last call from the hallway near the vending machines, the hum of the hospital like a great, kind engine. He spoke to the hospital foundation director and established a standing fund in Sophie's file private, renewable, designed to outlast surprise. He authorized payments not only for treatment, but for the little things dignity often sacrificed. Parking, meals, a proper chair beside a child's bed. When he returned, Sophie held up a new drawing. 3 tall daisies, bright and stubborn, rooted in a tidy row. Underneath, in blocky kid letters, she'd written, "Home." Michael crouched to her eye level. "That's perfect," he said. "It's a plan," Sophie replied, echoing Dr. Chun without knowing, "We're going home." And for the first time since a 6-year-old boy named Henry had slipped from his grasp, Michael believed home could be a place you build again from seeds, from truth, from people who decided to stand in the same sunlight and call it theirs. Weeks stacked into months, and the 4th floor of St. Grace began to feel less like a battlefield, and more like a map, corridors traced with routines, doors marked by tiny victories. Sophie moved into a private room painted the color of summer lemonade. A fold-out chair appeared by the window for Elena, soft enough that sleep didn't punish her spying. Nurse Danielle learned Sophie's favorite knock-knock jokes. Child Life set up an easel. Dr. Chun calibrated each infusion as if tuning a delicate instrument. Michael showed up with a steadiness that surprised even him. Mondays he brought breakfast, sandwiches and fruit. Wednesdays he read aloud, 1 chapter from Adventure, 1 from a picture book Sophie refused to outgrow. Fridays he arrived late, past visiting hours, with permission and a bag of takeout that made hospital air smell like the outside world chicken noodle from the diner on Grover. Mac and cheese thick enough to count as comfort. He and Elena formed rituals. She would list the week's bills. He would nod and slide new forms into the donor file. She would pretend she wasn't exhausted. He would pretend he didn't notice until he quietly took the mop from her hands at the house and finished the kitchen himself. She insisted on working, precision intact, but the work no longer looked like penance. It looked like a woman determined to keep the pieces of her life in order while hope built a scaffold around her. One evening, rain stitched lines across the windshield as they parked under the hospital's overhang. Elena sat with her hands on her tote and eyes on the storm. "Can I ask you something personal?" Michael said, voice gentle. "You've earned the right," she answered without looking at him, Sophie's dad. "Where is he?" Elena's jaw tightened. "He left when the diagnosis arrived. Said he hadn't signed up for this kind of life." Anger flashed hot and clean in Michael's chest. "He didn't sign up to be a father then. It's better this way," she said, a calm that had cost her. "Sophie deserves people who stay." Michael didn't speak. He just reached across the console and squeezed her hand once, steady, then let go. That small permission to be held, even for a heartbeat, shifted something neither of them tried to name. The medical numbers began to bend in their favor. MRD, minimal residual disease, dropped from measurable to barely a whisper, then to undetectable. Like footsteps receding down a hall. Lab printouts that once cast shadows now unfolded sunlight. Side effects that had bullied Sophie softened under newer meds. A fuzz of new hair arrived under her knit caps. Her cheeks learned blush again. On the whiteboard by her bed, Dr. Chun drew tiny daisies each week, a milestone held. Sophie made rules for bravery. Rule number 1, you can cry, but you can't quit. Rule number 2, tell the truth even if it makes grown-ups do the tight-mouth face. Rule number 3, always plant something. She taped the rules to the 4-pole, and the nurses read them when nights ran long. On a Tuesday, in late spring, Michael found Sophie sitting cross-legged on the bed, a crayon gripped like a conductor's baton. She had drawn a row of daisies in the exacting, symmetrical lines of a child who needed the world to hold still. "Perfect rows make me feel safe," she said without looking up. "We'll make them so perfect the bees file a complaint." Michael sighed. and earned a laugh that threaded straight through him. He learned her rhythms, the minute before a needle when she held her breath, the post-infusion slump when she wanted jokes and not questions, the late afternoon window when she would talk like an old soul. He told her about Henry one day, and she listened the way only children do, without pity, without fixing, without fear. "I'll get better," she said, simple as weather. "Then you can remember him without the hurt part." Elena stood at the sink, pretending the faucet needed her attention. Michael swallowed and said, "I'd like that." By early summer, Sophie's charts began to use words like encouraging and sustained. Michael met with the hospital foundation and set up something larger than a file note, a standing account that covered not just chemo and scans, but parking passes, gas cards, meals, a proper recliner for exhausted parents, and art kits for kids who needed to make beauty in the middle of medicine. He kept it anonymous. He didn't want gratitude misfiled under his name. Elena understood the secrecy and guarded it like it was hers. At the house, life changed in quiet, domestic ways. Elena accepted the new contract salary increase, benefits, a clause that read like a shield, unlimited paid leave for dependent pediatric care. She stopped buying cleaning supplies with her own money. Michael noticed the first time she left an empty bottle in the bin and felt ridiculous tears prickle his eyes. She started eating lunch sitting down. On Sundays he found containers of soup in his fridge he hadn't cooked. "For the nights you forget to be human," a sticky note read in her slanted hand. They learned each other's smallnesses. Elena hummed when she was worried, always the same hymn, always off-key. Michael carried a pen in his pocket like a talisman from boardrooms he no longer needed. She organized spice jars alphabetically. He let them stay that way. She refused help with her laundry. He stopped offering and fixed a dryer vent instead. Sophie, meanwhile, stitched them together with the blunt force of child logic. "If we're a team," she would declare, "we need a name." She tested options: the Daisy Squad, the Stay People, the Strong Three. Elena vetoed the Bald and the Beautiful, with a smile that said she loved it anyway. 6 months to the day after Michael first followed Elena up to the 4th floor, the three of them sat in Dr. Chun's office while a printer spat out the future in black and white. The oncologist's smile arrived before her words did. "I have wonderful news," she said, voice steady with joy. "Sophie's latest tests show complete remission. There's no evidence of disease." Elena's body moved before her mind caught up. She sat, then stood, then sat again, both hands over her mouth. Michael reached for the edge of the counter because the room tilted under the weight of relief. Sophie looked from one face to the other, eyebrows arched like question marks. "Does that mean I win?" she asked. Dr. Chun laughed softly. "It means you've won this battle. We'll keep watching for 5 years, but right now, you get to go home." Sophie burst into tears, the honest kind that comes when a door opens you weren't sure existed. Elena folded herself around her daughter, forehead to forehead, both of them shaking with a joy that made them clumsy. Michael stepped into the hallway for a breath, pressed his palm to the cool wall, and let his own tears come in quiet, grateful lines. When he returned, he carried a bouquet of white daisies, stems wrapped in hospital ribbon. He set them in Sophie's lap. "For the garden," he said. "Our garden," Sophie corrected, wiping her cheeks with the heel of her hand. "Our garden," he agreed. They did the ceremonial things, rang the brass bell bolted to the pediatric oncology wall, signed Sophie's name in big letters on the remission board, hugged nurses who had stood guard over their most fragile hours. In the parking lot, the evening light looked like it had been switched on from inside the sky. Back at the house, Elena stood in the kitchen as if rediscovering the geography. She touched the counter, the drawer pull, the faucet handle. "Tomorrow," she said, "I'm taking a day off. I'm going to sleep in, then I'm going to sit in the sun and do nothing. I'll probably be terrible at it. You'll be excellent at it, Michael said. I'll make terrible pancakes to celebrate. You make excellent everything, she countered, then flushed at how easily the words came. He cleared his throat, nerves skittering where boldness usually lived. There's something I've been wanting to ask, he said. Both of you. Elena's chin lifted. Okay. Sophie needs to go home, he said, and home should be more than an address halfway between here and a hospital. So he exhaled, started again. I bought a small place. Not a mansion, a house that feels like people actually live in it. It has a big backyard and terrible grass, and a fence that needs painting, and a patch that's perfect for daisies. I was hoping, if you wanted, you and Sophie could live there. With me. Elena didn't answer right away. She looked past him, into the room where her life had been 2 years of carefully controlled steps. Fear flickered old, learned, protective. Then Sophie's voice carried down the hall from the car, where she was still buckling her stuffed rabbit. Mom, is there room for a swing? Elena smiled small at first, then wide and real. She met Michael's eyes. If there's a swing, she said, there has to be shade. I'll plant a tree, he said, something in him daring to believe in future tenses. And daisies. She added, as many rows as Sophie wants, he promised. Elena nodded, decision settling in like a key in a lock. Then yes, she said, we'll come home. That night, long after Elena had left with Sophie to pack a life that never fit into boxes, Michael walked the empty rooms of his mansion and felt no grief. He felt movement. He felt a child's laughter echoing from a backyard he hadn't seen yet. He felt a woman's hum finding harmony with the quiet he'd worn like armor. He stood at the window and saw it clearly. A small house with a crook fence, a garden lined with white petals, a table set for 3. And in that vision, new and ordinary and miraculous, he realized wealth had finally become the thing it was always meant to be, a way to make room for love. 2 weeks later, Michael stood on the front steps of a modest craftsman on a quiet street, watching Sophie race the length of the backyard with a ribbon of laughter unspooling behind her. The lawn was patchy, the fence needed paint, and a brand new swing hung from a sturdy beam he'd added to the old oak. Inside, Elena moved around a kitchen that looked lived in before the first pot boiled. A jar of wooden spoons on the counter. A dish towel clipped to the oven handle. Sunlight performing small miracles on stainless steel. After dinner, they walked the yard, with paper packets of daisy seeds. Sophie knelt with the seriousness of a surgeon and pressed each seed into soil, counting softly. Perfect rows, she said. So the bees know where to land. Michael crouched beside her. We'll make the rows so perfect the neighborhood bees recommend us. Elena looked up from the garden bed, hair pinned back, a smudge of dirt on her cheek she didn't bother to wipe. There was rest in her face now, not just exhaustion that had given up pretending. Perfect is overrated, she said. But this, she gestured to the swing, the rose, the house. This feels right. Sophie's recovery tilted from hope to habit. By August, she was enrolled at Jefferson Elementary, 3rd grade. Teacher Ms. Alvarez, who wore big earrings and gave out stickers that said, "You did a hard thing." Sophie made a friend the first morning by sharing her jelly beans in a precise color order. Each afternoon, she came home and watered the daisies, narrating their growth like a sports announcer. We have liftoff on row 2. One evening, after dishes and homework and a triumphant swim session, Michael sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad and said, as if asking whether anyone wanted tea, "I want to build something for families like ours." Elena stilled. "Like ours," she repeated, testing the words as if they might bite. He nodded. "A place near St. Grace that pays for what insurance ignores and life punishes: meds, scans, parking, meals, a decent chair for a parent to sleep in, counseling, art supplies, practical help, fast. I want to call it the Henry and Sophie Foundation." In honor of the boy I couldn't save and the girl we did. Elena's eyes glossed. Sophie set down her pencil. Will there be crayons? She asked, very serious. Tons, Michael said. And markers that don't dry out. Then I'll donate my drawings, Sophie declared. To make the halls less boring. Michael looked to Elena. I'd like you to run it, she blinked. Me? No one understands the maze like you do, he said. You know where. It scrapes people raw. You know what words don't help and what hands do. Elena's laugh trembled. I've never run anything in my life. You've run on fumes for 2 years and kept your child alive, he answered. That's the only credential that matters. 3 months later, the Henry and Sophie Foundation opened in a renovated brick building across from St. Grace. The ribbon was white with tiny printed daisies Sophie had drawn. Dr. Chun came, along with Nurse Danielle and a dozen families who knew the 4th floor too well. Volunteers stocked shelves, gas cards, grocery vouchers, child care stipends for siblings. An airy room with soft chairs and blankets became the respite lounge. A wall of cubbies held art kits. A small office at the end of the hall bore a plaque. Director, Elena Carter. On the first afternoon, a mother arrived with a toddler on her hip and fear in her throat. Elena took her into the office, shut the door gently, and listened. When the woman finished listing all the ways the world had narrowed to a single suffocating point, Elena reached across the desk. You're not alone, she said. We'll help with the bills. We'll arrange the rides. We'll sit with you. When it's loud and when it's quiet. She smiled, the steady kind that doesn't crack. You don't have to fix everything today. Today, you just have to breathe. Word spread the way good news does, quietly, stubbornly, in lives that had learned to expect the opposite. The foundation became a map taped to a fridge in kitchens, where people needed directions out of panic. Michael hid his name on the paperwork and put his time in the lobby, stocking shelves, offering coffee, learning to hear the difference between silence that asks for company and silence that asks to be left intact. On a late afternoon drenched in gold, Michael found Elena in her office. Window open to the sound of a city rediscovering its evening. She stood with her back to him, flipping through a file. That off-key hum he'd come to recognize trailing the movement of her thoughts. He set a small velvet box on the desk. She turned. The box looked almost comically small under fluorescent light. Michael? He cleared his throat. A man who could negotiate 8-figure deals struggling for a single sentence. These months being with you and Sophie, I've felt something I thought was gone for good. Family. Purpose. I love you, Elena. I love. Sophie, would you marry me? She stared at the box, then at him, then away, as if watching the film of her own life and wanting to get the ending right. I'm not a mansion kind of woman, she said softly. I'm a pack lunch, clip coupons, plant and rose woman. I'm a plant and rose man now, he said, wholly earnest. And the ring is simple. He opened the box. A slender band, a modest stone, nothing that tried to say more than the truth. Elena laughed a sound so bright it seemed to coin new air, and covered her mouth with her hand. Yes, she said, before the sensible part of her could draft. Requirements, yes. Sophie, summoned by a text that read surprise, came barreling down the hall, skidded into the office, and stopped dead at the sight of the ring on her mother's finger. Does this mean, she asked, eyes huge, that I get to be the flower girl and we're a family forever? It means exactly that, Michael said, and picked her up while she pumped both fists in the air like a tiny champion. They chose a place that had held their worst nights and their best endings, the chapel at St. Grace. The ceremony was small. Dr. Chun in the front row, nurses in scrubs along the aisle, families from the 4th floor filling the pews, foundation volunteers shoulder to shoulder. Sophie wore a pink dress and carried a bouquet of daisies clipped from the backyard, bald patches nearly overtaken by stubborn new hair. Michael spoke first. I once believed love was a thing you planned into your calendar, he said, voice steadier than his heart. Then life taught me loss makes a liar of schedules. Meeting you both taught me something better, that love finds you at the exact moment you decide to use your life for someone else's good. Alana's vows were simpler, truer. You taught me I could accept help without losing myself. She said, you taught me the kind of staying that doesn't make a promise once. It makes it every day. The chaplain nodded, the nurses cried openly, and Sophie stepped up on tiptoe to the lectern. Now we're a real family, she announced, unbothered by microphones. And we're going to help other families. That's our job. Applause rose, not polite but grateful, the sound a hospital makes when hope is no longer hypothetical. They celebrated with sheet cake in the lobby and paper cups of punch. In photos, the daisies looked like small suns between human hands dotted home that evening. The three of them stood in the yard. The rose had come in thick and white, each daisy as small. Insistence on joy. Sophie tugged Michael's sleeve. Can I ask you something? Always. Do you still miss Henry? He took a breath that reached places he hadn't named. Every day. Does it still hurt like before? He looked at the house, at Elena's silhouette in the kitchen window, at the swing moving. Slightly on its own, it hurts different, he said. Like when you press a bruise to remember the story, but not to make it worse. Sophie considered, then nodded, satisfied. I think Henry likes our garden, she said. He probably told the bees. They ate dinner at the small table with the wobbly leg Michael still hadn't fixed because it made them laugh. After dishes, Elena stepped onto the porch and took his hand. We did a hard thing, she said. We did a lot of hard things. And tomorrow we'll do more. But tonight we just... She looked at the rows of daisies, the swing, the warm square of light in their kitchen. We just live. The wind lifted, mussed Sophie's hair as she ran a fingertip along the neat white petals. Somewhere in the rustle, Michael heard a boy's voice he'd once loved, not as an ache but as a benediction. He squeezed Elena's hand, felt the small weight of Sophie lean into his side.